Good evening and welcome to the Indiana Debate Commission's U.S. Senate debate. We are coming to you live from a studio at public television station WFYI in Indianapolis. And joining me tonight are three candidates who hope to represent you, the people of Indiana, in Washington. The winner will succeed Senator Dan Coates, a Republican who is retiring. I am your moderator, Ken Owen. I am Executive Director of Media Relations at DePauw University in Greencastle. I'm also a former television news anchor and reporter. My experience included time at WISH and WRTV here in Indianapolis and at WEYI in Fort Wayne. For the next hour, the candidates will debate a variety of domestic and international issues that a U.S. Senator is likely to face. Many of the questions came from you, members of the public, who submitted queries to the Debate Commission about what concerns you. Some of those who provided questions are here with us tonight in person. Now, none of the questions that will be asked tonight have been shared in advance with any of the three candidates. With that taken care of, here are our candidates. Lucy Brenton is the Libertarian candidate. She is a finance professional. Evan Bayh is the Democratic candidate. He is a former U.S. Senator and the former governor of Indiana. Todd Young is the Republican candidate. He is the congressman representing Indiana's 9th District in the south central and southeast part of the state. The candidates' positions on the stage and the order in which they will answer the questions were determined by lot conducted by the Debate Commission. After I ask a question, each candidate in turn will have the opportunity to respond for 1 minute. Rebuttal periods of 30 seconds each will be on an as-needed basis. If a candidate exceeds the amount of time given for his or her response, I will have to ask them to stop. And before the final question, each candidate will be given an opportunity to address a topic of their choice. This allows the candidates to discuss a topic they feel is important but hasn't been touched on by the questions in the actual program. They can also go back to a topic that was discussed earlier so they can delve in it further. The candidates have agreed to a set of rules which include no props or prepared notes at the podium. At this time, the candidates will have the opportunity to further introduce themselves. We're going to have them make a 1-minute opening statement, starting with Mrs. Brenton.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the Indiana Debate Commission, my fellow Hoosiers, and of course my esteemed opponents. Hi, my name is Lucy Brenton, but you probably don't know who I am because I haven't spent $30 million to win a job that pays under $200,000 a year. But you do know me because I'm a wife, a mother, the daughter of a disabled American veteran, and I'm a Hoosier like you that's really sick and tired of what's going on in our country. You see, special interest groups have hijacked us, and it's time that we send them a new message that Hoosier voters can't be bought. I'm running against Mr. Bayh because he spent too much time in D.C. looking for a lobbying job instead of serving Hoosiers. He's not one of us. And I'm running against Mr. Young because although he talks conservative, when it comes right down to vote, he votes to raise the national debt. But that's okay because as your senator, I will uphold the rule of law so that there is justice for everyone. And I will call for a strong national defense so that we can be safe. I will work to end the debt burden that is facing our grandchildren. Hopefully this evening you will see for me a brighter future for our America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brenton. Mr. Bayh, your 1-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Ken. It's good to be with you, and it's great to have an opportunity to have a conversation with my fellow Hoosiers. I'm pleased to be joined tonight by my wife of 31 years, Susan. Sweetheart, I love you. Now, I know we're going to hear a lot of negative attacks during the course of this evening from Congressman Young, and I'm looking forward to answering those attacks. But first, I want to tell you why I'm running and what together we can do to solve your problems, because that's what this election should really be all about. I'm running to help small businesses get the capital they need to expand and create jobs. I'm running to level the playing field on trade deals so that our jobs won't be shipped to Mexico and China. I'm running to make sure that college is affordable, building on the 21st Century Scholars Program so our kids can afford to go to college like they deserve. I'm running to make sure that Social Security and Medicare are there for you in your golden years to keep that commitment. I will work with Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians to make progress for you. I'll fight against the extremes of both parties to make progress for you, because making progress for you, helping our families, building a better Indiana and a better America, that's what this election should be all about.
Mr. Bayh, thank you. And Mr. Young, your 1-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Growing up here in Indiana, my dad used to tell me every day that if I dreamed big, if I worked hard, good things would happen in life. I believed it. I still believe it. Jenny and I want our 4 children to believe it as well. We want for those 4 children what every Hoosier wants. a quality education that turns into a good paying job, that leads to a meaningful career and affordable health care right here in Indiana. Now, my belief in the future took me to the U.S. Naval Academy. It gave meaning to my service in the U.S. Marine Corps, and it served me well in the private economy. I've spent most of my professional life fighting to protect and preserve America's promise, but right now it's under fire. Now, I'm not a career politician. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm a Hoosier. I'm a Marine who wants to put people before politics. At a time when far too many of our career politicians seemingly have forgotten who they work for, where they live, and can't even imagine a cause greater than themselves, I'll always serve a cause greater than myself. This Marine will always serve you. I hope to earn your support.
Thank you, Mr. Young. We are now on to our first question of the evening, and as I told you off the top, several of our questions will be presented by voters. And with us tonight is Brian Nellenweg, a teacher from Chesterton. Mr. Nellenweg?
To the general public, Congress is seen as an institution that is not working. Republicans and Democrats alike fail to come together in order to address major issues affecting our country. Where in your political career can you point to a time in which you worked with members of the other party to accomplish something meaningful?
Mrs. Brenton, we'll begin with you, then Mr. Bayh, then Mr. Young.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. In fact, I'm a Libertarian, so there has not yet been a political office that I've held. But what I do have is I have 10 children, and I will tell you there is no more peacemaking and crossing the aisles that comes along when you're looking at a fight between a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. So I'd like to bring that experience to Congress because, quite frankly, sometimes our congressional members act like children, and sometimes they should probably be put in a corner. But without those extremes, it's time that we work together as a family and as a nation for those solutions that will bring us economic prosperity and peace.
Mr. Bayh?
Ryan, thank you for your question, and thank you for your work with our children. And I'm proud to have been endorsed by Indiana's teachers in this election. Let me give you two examples. The first is probably something that's near and dear to your heart. I worked with a Republican state Senate and a Democratic House of Representatives to pass the 21st Century Scholars Program that's enabled 70,000 of our young people to go on and afford a college education. It's good for them. They'll be better employees, better taxpayers, more responsible citizens, but it's also good for all of us when we create a country of opportunity that allows our young people to work hard, do the right thing, and get ahead. That's what we need more of in Washington, D.C. Another example is I work with Senator Collins from Maine, a good Republican, to bring together all of the efforts in our country to fight Alzheimer's. It's a terrible disease that afflicts too many of our families. We added resources, we coordinated those efforts, and I was honored just this last spring to get an award for that. Making it possible for our kids to go to college, fighting Alzheimer's, coming together in a bipartisan way to move this country forward and to grow our economy, that's what this election should be all about.
Mr. Young?
Thank you for the question. Hoosiers are tired of the empty rhetoric. Throughout my very short political life, I've been able to work across the aisle to get consequential things done. One example would be repealing the 30-hour provision in Obamacare and restoring the 40-hour work week. This is a provision in Obamacare that has put at risk the jobs, hours, and wages of 2.6 million American workers. I've been very proud to get that passed out of the House of Representatives, and I hope to continue to fight for it as your next United States Senator. But you know, it's unfortunate that we have this provision to deal with in the first place. Obamacare never needed to be passed. Hoosiers pleaded with Evan Bayh to vote against Obamacare, but he ignored their wishes. He instead decided, as a D.C. insider, to listen to political interests in Washington, D.C. He listened to his party bosses. I'm a Hoosier Marine. I'll always fight for Hoosier values and do whatever is in Hoosiers' best interest, not the interest of party leaders in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Young? Mr. Bayh, would you like to rebut that?
Well, yes, of course I would. I actually agree with Congressman Young. We should extend the definition of the work week from 30 hours to 40 hours. I also think we should expand the definition of a small business from 50 to 100 to make it easier on small businesses. But Congressman Young wants to take us back to the days where the insurance companies have unlimited profits. He wants to take 350,000 of our fellow Hoosiers' health insurance away from them. He wants to reopen the donut hole, costing our seniors more than $1,400 a year in additional prescription drug costs. We don't want to go back to those days, and I'll fight to make sure that we don't.
Mrs. Brenton is waiting. I'll let you in a
I
minute.
was invoked. All right, thank you, sir.
And you are, and you can go after me. Thank you.
Yes.
You know what I really am stymied about is the interference in the natural relationship between an employer and an employee. It's not up to government to decide whether 30 hours or 40 hours is an appropriate work week. It's up to the employee and the employer to negotiate that between themselves. If we can get rid of the government interventionism, then perhaps we can go back to a time when people actually matter. In fact, in World War II, the only reason we came up with these insurance benefits is because there were price and wage controls that prevented us from paying workers what they were worth, and so we came up with the insurance scheme in order to give them money.
Mr. Young has promised your chance to respond.
Evan Bayh just defended Obamacare. Hoosiers find Obamacare highly unpopular, and they do because it's a real job killer. It's the largest tax increase in American history, and it was imposed by Evan Bayh despite the wishes of Hoosiers. It was imposed during the worst possible moment during our recovery. It's no wonder we're not growing more jobs in this country. 21 new taxes in Obamacare, most of which fall on middle-class families. Middle-class Hoosier families, healthcare costs continue to go up. This is a bad law. We need to start over in a bipartisan way.
This is our first question. I'm going to give you 15 seconds each because I see Mr. Bayh wants to weigh in on this again.
Well, 15 seconds. We need to fix the parts of the law that need to be fixed, but Congressman Young wants to take us back to the days when insurance companies could charge women more for their insurance just because they happen to be female. That's not right. He wants to deny health care coverage for 350,000 of our fellow citizens. Governor Pence and I think that shouldn't be done. And he also wants to go back to the days when insurance companies could cancel your policy just because you got sick. I don't think that's a step in the right direction.
Mr. Young, and then Ms. Brenton.
These are clearly D.C. politician talking points. They bear no resemblance to the reality. What I want to do is work together, Republicans, Democrats, ground up. I want to consult with Hoosiers about the sort of health care program they want to bring down costs, expand access to care to all Americans. Evan Bayh wants to maintain Obamacare and a law that cannot be sustained and is causing way too much harm.
Mrs. Brenton.
Why are we bickering about what a person should be forced to do? The fact of the matter is Americans deserve to be free. They deserve to be free from the government regulation that comes along with a forced insurance scam.
And now a question submitted by a voter to the Debate Commission. We received several questions regarding climate change. Some, as you know, argue that human activities play a key role in climate change, and then others, as you know, say the very notion of climate change is a myth. Where do you stand in the spectrum, and how should the U.S. prioritize its energy sources? Mr. Bayh.
Well, I think climate change is real. The question is, what should we do about it? And I think we should do several things. First, we should emphasize renewables like wind and solar, which are expanding across Indiana. That's a good thing. We should emphasize efficiency, retrofitting our homes and businesses so that we can save energy. That's a good thing. We should emphasize clean coal generation, which we have here in Indiana. That would help the Hoosier mining business and also help Hoosier utility rate payers. We should emphasize ethanol, which unfortunately Congressman Young has voted against. But I don't think we should have the cap and trade system, and I don't agree with the Clean Power Plan. That's something that I disagree with Mrs. Clinton on. I think those things would be harmful to Hoosier consumers. So let's go about this the right way. Renewables, efficiency, clean coal, but let's not hurt Indiana businesses or consumers. I would not support that.
Mr. Young.
Well, this is a global issue. It's not a Hoosier problem. We don't want to wreck our economy trying to deal with it, and Evan Bayh has supported an energy tax in the past. His plan would lead to an increase of $1,700 tax per American household. It would hurt our manufacturers disproportionately. We are the most manufacturing-intensive state in the entire country. We need to stand up for our manufacturing workers, and it would also hurt our farmers. I'm proud that the Indiana Farm Bureau has considered me a friend of farmers, proud to carry that title around, but if we're imposing carbon taxes on our fuel, on our fertilizer, and on other sources, that's going to injure Indiana's economy. So where do these ideas come from? They certainly don't come from Hoosiers themselves. They come from party leaders in Washington, D.C., and special interests like the one that Evan Bayh now works for as a lobbyist and that has enriched him and his family to the tune of millions of dollars.
Mrs. Brenton?
Thank you. You know, climate change is a sticky subject. It's almost a religion, with people saying that it's there and it's not. The fact of the matter is humans have only been here for a blip in the eons, and I don't have enough data from the last 100 or 200 years to determine whether we're getting colder or warmer. In fact, when I was a child growing up in the 70s, it was the coming ice age. So I say, yes, let's prioritize energy sources, but let's let the free market do it. And most importantly, let's end our dependence on foreign oil. The way that we can do that is allowing commercial hemp growth. Indiana has amazing soil. We could get 3 to 4 harvests of hemp, and that oil, that biodiesel, that's what can save us. It'll save our economy, and it will save it will save the environment.
Opportunity for rebuttal, Mr. Bayh.
Thank you, Ken. Well, desperate people do desperate things, and clearly Congressman Young is getting pretty desperate. It's not true that I was for cap and trade. I'm against cap and trade. It's not true that I have ever been a lobbyist. Simply not true. But Congressman Young is familiar with lots of them. He's taken $160,000 in campaign contributions from lobbyists, and he's voted with the lobbyists for the big banks to repeal consumer protections. He's voted with the lobbyists for the insurance industry to reopen the donut hole. He's voted with the lobbyists for the tax deductions for carrier that incent shipping our jobs overseas. So if there's a conflict of interest in this election, it's a conflict between Congressman Young's voting record and the best interests of the people of the state of Indiana.
Mr. Bayh had a chance. Would you like to rebut?
Absolutely. So with respect to the carbon tax, perhaps I can't keep all the taxes you're for straight. You're for 21 separate taxes in Obamacare, most of which hit our middle class during the trough in our economy. It has led to stagnant job creation here in the state of Indiana, and Evan Bayh cast the deciding vote for Obamacare. We would not have Obamacare, ladies and gentlemen, but for Evan Bayh's vote. With respect to being a lobbyist, okay, he's a partner at a lobbying firm. Maybe they pay him $2 million not to lobby.
Mrs. Brenton.
Can we talk about the carbon tax? I mean, isn't that kind of silly? We're going to give an international organization the right to tax us. You know, maybe I'll become a breatharian, and then you can tax me for breathing, since I won't be eating. Let's talk about real solutions to problems instead of bickering back and forth. And let's plant commercial hemp. We can fix the nitrogen, we can solve that problem.
Thank you. My goal is to give everybody as equal a shot as possible, and we're going to move on to the next question. I know we could stay on that one for a while, but let's turn to a very serious international issue that's been in the news. Under what circumstances should America send additional troops and humanitarian aid to Middle Eastern hotspots such as Iraq and Syria or to Afghanistan? We'll begin with Mr. Young.
Well, we ought not be placing artificial limits or timetables. That's one of the things certainly that we've learned in Iraq and Afghanistan on our troops. We need to establish a very clear mission for victory throughout the Middle East. We want to defeat ISIS. We want to remove Assad from power. And I have proposed a resolution calling on our NATO partners to collectively pool our resources, pool our intelligence, and pool our energies to come up with a multilateral strategy to accomplish those couple of things. Now, I can imagine that some of the components to a strategy will involve flying more sorties, loosening the rules of engagement so that we can kill more of the terrorists on the ground, and establishing safe zones to address this humanitarian crisis on the ground rather than leading to a refugee crisis both in Europe and here in the United States. None of this will be accomplished if we continue the Obama-Clinton lead from behind foreign policy. I'm a Marine Corps intelligence officer. I will be vigilant against whomever our next president of the United States is, making sure they have a very clear policy and the U.S. stays engaged in the world. Thank you.
Mrs. Brenton.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked, because as a mother, what I want is I want my children to grow up in a world that's full of peace. And I don't see that here. In fact, I don't even remember Congress declaring an act of war, and they didn't declare this war, so it seems to be an illegal war, so it should be stopped. The first thing that I recommend, and I would do, is I would stop arming everybody. Can we stop being the world's gun salesman? That would be a good thing to stop being. I want to stop dropping bombs on everybody. We're bombing wedding parties, for goodness sake, and then double tapping and killing the first responders like my brother Adam, who's a fireman. Boy, does that make me mad. What we need is diplomatic action. Somewhere between being the world's policeman and an isolationist, there's got to be somewhere in that range that's better than what we're doing now. Humanitarian aid only. People are hurting. Real people are starving. Those are the people that we should be helping. So let's not continue these endless foreign wars.
Mr. Bayh.
Well, Ken, I think it's a good thing that we can agree on a bipartisan manner that we should fight ISIS and defeat global terrorism. We need to continue the offensive that just started in the last 48 hours to retake Mosul, to deny them their safe space in Iraq. Our special forces in Syria should work with the Kurds and the Turks to retake Raqqa, to deny them their safe spaces in Syria from which they can launch attacks against us. We need to empower our intelligence services, and I've been pleased to work for the last 6 years as an advisor to the CIA to make sure that we can combat ISIS abroad so they can't attack us at home. We need to empower our Department of Homeland Security and our FBI so that they can find lone wolf attackers here at home before they have a chance to strike. But most of all, what we need to do to combat the scourge of global terrorism is to win the war of ideas. Because simply put, we are better than our adversaries. We stand for freedom. They stand for despotism. We stand for the right to worship God, to elect our officials, and to speak our minds as we see fit. And I think if we stand for those things and those principles, then in the long run we will triumph over our adversaries who stand for beheadings and terrorism.
Are we okay to move on to the next question? I saw a couple of people fidget.
Yes, please.
Mrs. Brenton, go.
Yeah,
she actually moved first.
I would love to rebut if that's okay.
Please.
You know, that was really impressive, Mr. Bayh. I'm always shocked when people are talking about, you know, this faction and that faction, but the faction we're arming today is the one that tomorrow is going to turn around and point their guns, the ones that we gave them, at our troops. And our sons and daughters are dying, and that's just not right. So it's time to stop the killing.
Mr. Young.
Remind people, I have real-world experience here. I haven't just sat in committee hearings and in committee rooms and monitored this situation. I actually understand what a Marine on the ground goes through. I understand. I've seen generals and admirals wrestle with difficult decisions, so I add value in this area. Evan Bayh sat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, but he skipped multiple hearings, and during his last year in office, he spent 60 days shopping for a job as a lobbyist, as opposed to being vigilant in this war on terror.
Mr. Bayh.
Ken, I've always been strong in the war on terror, and I'm proud to say that I've always supported our troops. Congressman Young, on the other hand, has voted repeatedly against our veterans. He's voted to cut funding for PSTD sufferers. He's voted to cut funding for suicide prevention. He's voted to cut funding for the VA healthcare system. He's voted to cut funding for reintegration of our vets so they can get jobs. So it's surprising to me that someone like Congressman Young would talk tough here on the stage and repeatedly vote against our vets. I will stand with our vets.
I've got another international question for you now. Vladimir Putin and Russia. Russia has become increasingly active internationally in the past few years. Do you see Russia as a potential ally in the war on terrorism that needs to be courted by the U.S., or as a potential aggressor and enemy that needs to be confronted? Mrs. Brenton, you're first.
You know, a friend of mine just told me that they saw an interesting video on TV, and it was Putin appealing to the American people to let them know the things that our country is doing that we don't know about. In fact, it seems like every day I have to get on WikiLeaks to find out what's really going on. So quite frankly, if I'm looking at the information that's being given to me by my own government, I simply don't trust it. So to ask a question about what should be done with Putin, with the limited information that I have, I think I'm going to trust WikiLeaks a little bit more. So without looking at the WikiLeaks documents, it would be difficult to decide what to do with Putin. But I'm always in favor of making friends. And I think the best way to make friends is by making economic alliances, free trade, fair trade. When you're trading with somebody, when you're looking them in the eye and you're making those types of relationships, it's very difficult to go drop bombs on them.
Mr. Bayh.
Well, Ken, Vladimir Putin is a tyrant, and he's deeply hostile to the United States. The only thing the man understands is power, and so we have to push back. We have to push back and impose more economic sanctions for his aggression in the Ukraine. I agree with Secretary Kerry there should be war crimes trials to bring those responsible in Syria and in Russia to account for the crimes that they are committing inside Syria. I think that we should encourage the Europeans to develop their natural gas exports, which would make them more independent from the Russian natural gas. But above all, we need to work with our allies to make sure that Vladimir Putin knows that we will stand strong and united against an aggressive Russia. Make no mistake. Oh, and the final thing, Ken, these reports that Russia is seeking to meddle in our domestic elections, this is deeply disturbing. There should be a consequence for that. We should take cyber actions against the financial interests of those in charge in Moscow. We cannot let the Russians commit crimes in Syria, Iraq, or meddle in our elections.
Mr. Young.
This is clearly why we need a change. We need a change with respect to our lead from behind Obama-Clinton foreign policy. It's inviting aggression from dictators like Vladimir Putin, and he's not done. It's the Ukraine, it's the Crimea, it's Syria. The Baltic states certainly are now being threatened. So this is a object lesson on why we cannot lead from behind. We have to stay engaged in the world. It's something I learned at the Naval Academy. It's something I learned in the U.S. Marine Corps. Only strong nations can consistently form alliances, deter aggression, and when necessary, win wars, though we have to be very careful about where and when we engage. I support further sanctions. I support working together multilaterally with our allies and partners in various regions around the world wherever possible, pooling our resources. We need some people with on-the-ground experience, not just people, professional politicians who have sat in committee hearings or D.C. lobbyists like Evan Bayh.
Mrs. Brenton wishes to rebut.
Yes, thank you. You know, I wish we'd just stop talking about dropping bombs. I was born in 1971, and yet we've been at war my entire life. This is unacceptable. You've got Putin, who was the KGB, but George Sr., he was CIA. So what do we have? We have a whole bunch of spooks running our country. I think it's time we have a real person running their country, like maybe a mom. And as far as the elections go, everybody knows that GEMS, G-E-M-S, and Diebold can actually control and thwart our elections. Look that up on Google, G-E-M-S, Diebold.
Would anybody else like to weigh in? We're going to move on to our next voter question in the studio. As I mentioned, we have several voters with us here tonight. The next question will be asked by Alexa Griffith, a parent from Noblesville, and she is here with us in the studio. Thank you.
What do you think needs to be done, if anything, to make it more difficult for dangerous people to get their hands on guns in Indiana? And will you work to require background checks on all gun sales?
We'll begin with Mr. Bayh.
Alexis, thank you for your question. It's a good one. Well, let me begin by saying I support the Second Amendment. I think our sportsmen, our hunters, and people who seek security in their own homes have a right to own firearms. I believe that. But I also think it's deeply wrong for those who've been identified as terrorists, known terrorists who are deemed to be so dangerous that they can't even get on an airplane. I don't think that we should be selling guns to them. And I also agree with the gist of your question that violent felons, people who have actually been convicted in a court of law of committing acts of violence and felonies, we should have background checks to make sure that they don't have access to firearms. So we need to strike the right balance here. Yes, protect the right, the Second Amendment right to own firearms. That's something I believe in very strongly. But don't let people who have been terrorists get their hands on weapons. That's something Congressman Young has voted repeatedly. For those who are on the actually no-fly list, we won't let them on airplanes, but he wants them to have guns. I just think that doesn't make sense.
Mr. Young, the floor is yours.
Well, Hoosiers can count on me to protect their gun rights, most certainly. It's enshrined in our Constitution. Our Supreme Court has been quite clear. But you know, every right has its limitations, and we should ensure that no one who is mentally ill gets access to a firearm. I've worked very hard in Congress supporting legislation to divert funding from other programs into those programs that are evidence-based and will keep a mental illness from becoming a public safety crisis. I've supported funding for more psychiatric beds to care for those who actually need help so that they too don't get access to firearms. So that's one bipartisan constructive thing we can do. One of the things I won't do, and one of the things at stake right here in this election, is not just control the United States Senate, but conceivably control the U.S. Supreme Court. Every time Evan Bayh's had a chance, he's voted for President Obama's nominees for the U.S. Supreme Court. He's voted against President Bush's more conservative nominees who ground their decisions in the actual text of the Constitution as opposed to legislating from the bench. Your gun rights will be jeopardized should Evan Bayh become the next U.S. Senator for Indiana.
Mrs. Brenton.
Thank you. Your gun rights are safe for me. I'm a strict constitutionalist and a constructionist. And one thing that I've learned is I don't just support the Second Amendment, I live it. I have a carry license here in Indiana. And it kind of bugs me for Mr. Young to say that every right has its limitations. You know, if somebody hasn't done anything wrong, then why are we preemptively charging them with a thought crime as if they can't do something? Our rights are given to us, and they're natural. They're given by our Creator. They should not be limited in that way. Now, as far as a no-fly zone airplane watch list, are you kidding me? I mean, my goodness, we are the epitome of political punishment. So many people, even Cat Stevens, the pacifist, was on a no-fly list. We wouldn't give him a gun. I'll tell you who I'm in favor of for background checks. The people that we're arming overseas, who end up with those guns that we sell them, $110 billion worth, that are now pointed right back at your moms, your dads, and people serving in the military. It's time to put them on the list and stop selling guns abroad. We should not be the world's largest arms dealer.
Mr. Bayh wishes to rebut.
Well, Ken, it's just not true what Congressman Young was saying. I support your Second Amendment rights to bear arms, and unless you are a known terrorist, have been convicted in a crime of a violent felony, or have been adjudicated to be insane, you've got no trouble from me.
Mr. Young, would you like to weigh in?
I proudly bear an A+ rating from the NRA, but the NRA and so many other responsible stakeholders will indicate that the tragedies that occur in my wife's hometown of Paoli, Indiana, our current home of Bloomington, Indiana, those that have occurred right here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and other large cities across the state are completely unacceptable, and so many of those are committed by people who are mentally ill. We ought not be providing firearms to the mentally ill. I will be a constructive, bipartisan voice in Congress and make sure we actually get things done on this front.
Mrs. Brenton, your opportunity.
Every time I bought a handgun, I passed a background check. And it was easy for me because I don't have any of those problems. But I'll tell you, we need to have a real discussion about mental illness in this country. Because if you look at every single one of the school shooters, they were all on SSRIs. They were on Paxil, Prozac, Zoloft. The real problem in this country is pharmaceuticals that are harming people's brains and causing them to commit these acts of atrocity. Eli Lilly is famous for this with Prozac, if I can pick on them for just a minute, and creating settlements with the families of those homicides and suicides.
On to a domestic question. Social Security. Is action needed to update the program so it's financially sound and provides adequate income for current and future generations? And if you say yes to that question, what would you do if elected? Mr. Young, you're first.
I'm so happy to have this question. Let me be very, very clear. We must keep our promise to all of our seniors. This is an earned benefit that our senior citizens pay into. So what I have proposed is absolutely no changes whatsoever for our current seniors and those approaching retirement, say 55 or older. But the program, according to President Obama's own actuaries, is unsustainable after 18 years. That means there's not enough money coming in payroll taxes to pay out all the benefits. So, you know, I'm in my early 40s. I'm prepared to work another couple of months to make this program sustainable. My record is different than Evan Bayh's. He's voted 4 times to increase taxes on Social Security benefits. He's voted to give Social Security benefits, your earned benefits, to illegal immigrants. He's also, to throw one more thing in there, he voted for Obamacare. We wouldn't have it except for Evan Bayh, and Obamacare cuts $700 billion from the Medicare program that is so important to our seniors. If you want someone who will fight for Hoosier values, vote for a Hoosier Marine who's connected to the state as opposed to a D.C. lobbyist who will listen to his party leaders when he casts these decisions so that they can help grow big government by using your Social Security dollars.
Mrs. Brenton.
I haven't thanked you yet for your service, Mr. Young. I do want to thank you for your service in the Marine Corps. I really appreciate it, and I don't mean any disrespect by this.
Privilege.
But I have been in the Mom Corps for 25 years, and what I teach my children is to speak the truth. And the first truth that we must speak is that when you run out of money, you stop digging a hole and you stop spending. You know, Mr. Young has been criticized for calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme, but he's speaking the truth when he says it. New workers coming in are paying for the old workers. Do you really believe the myth that there's some magical trust fund where this money's coming from? No, you can't, because we've been stolen from by inflation and by deflation. You see, in 1913, we got the Federal Reserve Act. It ended our opportunity to have an honest money system. Because we don't have an honest money system, the box of groceries that cost you a single dollar bill in 1913 takes $20. And until we get back to an honest money system, we can't fix Social Security or anything else for that matter.
We're going to move on to the next segment of our
Can I get an
program.
opportunity, Ken?
Please, I didn't see you.
Well, thank
look
you.
at
Well,
me.
Congressman Young has told so many whoppers here tonight, it's hard to keep track. It's not true that I voted to increase taxes on Social Security benefits. Just not true. It's not true that I voted to give Social Security benefits to illegal immigrants. That's been fact-checked multiple times and been determined to just be flat-out false. He talks about the $700 billion. Those were profits for the insurance industry. Profits for the insurance industry. You know, he's voted repeatedly. He wants to privatize Social Security, turn it over to Wall Street. He actually called Medicare, quote, welfare. Welfare. We pay into that system. It's not welfare. We shouldn't balance the budget or the Social Security situation on the backs of our seniors. He's voted to increase their premiums an average of $6,000 a year. Now, how are Hoosier seniors going to make ends meet doing that? He's voted to reopen the donut hole. $1,400 a year for our seniors more in prescription drug costs. That's just not right. So let's grapple with the problem of Social Security and Medicare, but let's not balance it on the backs of Hoosier seniors by making their lives more difficult.
Mr. Young, your opportunity.
These are the words of a D.C. politician, a career politician, spewing out talking points with very little veracity. He spent 30 years in public life. He's had his opportunity to help make Social Security sustainable for my generation, for my 4 young children, and I want to keep it around. He hasn't done anything. He passed 2 bills in 12 years as a United States Senator, not known as a highly prolific professional here. You know, he's all talk. He spent our money. He spent our Social Security money on everything but Social Security, stimulus, Obamacare, things that Hoosiers don't want. That's the record of a DC insider, not a Hoosier Marine that will fight for your values.
I'm going to let Mrs. Brenton respond because you wanted to. Then he mentioned your record. You get a chance, Mr. Bayh.
You know, what we're talking about here is the fact that there were people that were put into a Ponzi scheme. They are victims, no less than Bernie Madoff. My own father received Social Security, and he is a victim having paid into it just like anyone else. But when you have something that's wrong, you don't continue doing what's wrong. You man up and you do what's right. And what's right is to pay off the people who are in the Social Security system now until their benefits run out, and then sunset that program. Don't enslave my grandchildren for you.
Mr. Bayh, a brief rebuttal.
Sure, Ken. Last time I checked, Congressman Young is in Congress. So if you don't like Congress, then maybe you shouldn't vote for Congressman Young. But he mentioned my record and all the terrible things he alleges I've done. Well, let me tell you, I was proud to work with Dick Lugar to help the auto industry, saving 100,000 auto jobs across the state. Congressman Young said, let them go belly up. We don't do that to our fellow Hoosiers. I'm going to fight to end the tax loophole that promotes shipping our jobs overseas from companies like Carrier. Congressman Young has voted repeatedly for that tax cut for businesses to ship our jobs to Mexico and China. That's not the kind of representation we need in the United States Senate.
We're going to move forward now, folks. We've come to the segment in which the candidates can speak on a topic of their choice. We're going to arrange it so that the candidate who went last time, which is Mr. Bayh, will go first this time and talk for up to 1 minute. I've had to scribble my notes here because we've been moving around. Mrs. Brenton will go with a follow-up on that same topic for a maximum of 2 minutes, and then Mr. Young will have 2 minutes. If you're keeping a score at home and your scorecard's still clean, you're doing better than I am. And then we'll close out that topic with up to 1 minute of rebuttal, and I've got to keep this straight. The other 2 candidates will then have the same opportunity to speak on a topic of their choice following the rotation I just attempted to describe. So, as I promised, Mr. Bayh, the floor is yours with a topic of your choice.
Well, thank you, Ken. I'd like to talk about growing our economy, and I'd like to talk about trade. My top priority is expanding Hoosier business, creating good jobs, and helping wages rise. We've got to have a level playing field when it comes to trade in order to get that job done. And all too often, that's just not the case. I visited recently with the Edsel Company up in Lake County. They just lost a contract because China is illegally importing into our country products at below the cost of production. That's got to stop. I was at a Dow AgroScience here in Indianapolis not long ago. They can't even export their products into China because of illegal trade barriers. I've talked to too many Hoosier businesses that are losing jobs and losing business because of illegal currency manipulation or intellectual property theft. Those kind of things have to stop. And what also has to stop is the tax deduction for companies like Carrier that ship our jobs overseas. It's not right. I met with those workers recently, TJ and the others. They're losing everything. How does Congressman Young explain that he wants to keep that tax break for shipping their jobs to Mexico at a time when they're trying to make ends meet? It's just not right.
Mrs. Brenton, you now have up to 2 minutes to talk about trade.
Thank you. You know, it's so hard to listen to people banter back and forth because what they're really saying is, how can I, once I'm in Congress, slice off a little bit of a pie for my constituents? When you've spent $30 million on a race, those people expect a return on their investment. I mean, literally, I sat down and I thought about it. I'd spent less than $3,000 on this race so far. So for every $1,000 bill that my opponents have dumped into this to make sure that their corporate cronies get the free trade or managed trade that they want, I've spent a copper penny. A $1,000 bill versus a copper penny. If you want efficiency in government, then you should look to somebody from the Mom Corps who's actually had to balance a budget, who couldn't go off and do deficit spending. You know, you want to talk about illegal currency manipulation? We're just mad because BRIC got together, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, to go around us in our petrodollar status. Maybe you don't know it, but when people are buying oil, we're making money off of it, unless our, sometimes ally China is off doing their own thing. You really don't know what's going on until you do a little bit of research. So what I would like for you to do is I'd like you to, as Americans, to think about where our monetary system has been. The reason our economy stagnates, the reason we have a bubble and then a bust, is because we don't have an honest money system. The very foundation of our economy is rotten. And the one thing that I learned from flipping houses is that you have to have a strong foundation. Anything that you put on top of that, window dressing, smiling senators, it doesn't matter. Because if your foundation is corrupt, and I must tell you, our foundation is corrupt, you've got that. You want business to flood into this country? Set the corporate income tax to 0. Give corporations certainty about our tax laws. That's how you stimulate an economy. They will come in droves, it will level the playing field, and then make sure that you hold them to strict accountability so that they don't pollute. Thank you.
Mr. Young, up to 2 minutes on trade and jobs.
Sure. I support good trade deals. Trade is indeed about jobs. I support those that actually create jobs. I oppose deals that do the opposite, that will destroy our jobs and lead to lower household incomes. And when it comes to existing trade deals, I think we need to revisit those that are no longer working, work with our partners to make sure that those now work for Hoosiers. We need to strongly enforce existing trade deals. But one of the things that I will never do, and Evan Bayh did do, is vote to unleash a flood of outsourcing to China. A flood of outsourcing to China. That's not consistent with Hoosier values, so I'm wondering where Evan might have heard it. Perhaps he heard it from the D.C. insiders who he befriends, his neighbors in D.C. where he lives. Perhaps his clients, now his lobbying clients, they were people who prevailed upon him when he was a United States Senator and encouraged him to unleash a flood of outsourcing to China. I don't know, but there are other things we need to grow our economy as well. We need to simplify our tax code. We need to stop overtaxing made-in-America products where we effectively double tax our manufacturing goods. We have a proposal. I've thrown myself into a tax reform effort. We have a proposal to do just that. I think we need to simplify our code for our small businesses so that they're not disadvantaged as compared to our large corporations who bear so much influence in Washington, D.C. I think most of our individual payers should be able to file on the size of a postcard, and let's create a new, lower small business rate, because 2 out of every 3 jobs is created by small businesses. But perhaps the most important thing we can do is to remove the largest tax increase in American history. It's Obamacare. And we wouldn't have Obamacare if Evan Bayh didn't cast a deciding vote against the interest of Hoosiers, and in a very partisan way. He didn't invite Republican ideas in. There were no Republicans that supported this legislation. So we can hold Evan Bayh accountable in this election for his deciding vote for Obamacare, which is hurting jobs so much. It's a millstone around our economy.
And Mrs. Brenton, now we're to the second phase of our Lincoln-Douglas debate style. If you would give us 2 minutes on a topic of your choice, and we'll go round robin again. Thanks
so much. I really appreciate that. I'll tell you what, I've grown up in Indiana. I'm a native Hoosier. I graduated from Northwest High School on the west side, but I went to Broad Ripple High School for ballet. So I've been all around the city, and I've planted my roots here, and I've stayed here. There's one thing, though, that has really always caught my heart, and that's our farmers. Our farmers need economic prosperity, and they need it without dumping tons and tons of chemicals into our soil. In fact, what I would say is if our farmers want a cash crop, and I mean a cash crop, commercial hemp is the way to go. You can make a rope with it. In fact, may I submit to you that it would end our dependence on foreign oil, and that's the very reason we're not growing it right now, because these 2 gentlemen to my left are paid for and receive money from the oil industry. If you could only look at opensecrets.org, you would see exactly where their money comes from and know that they're here to do a job for the people that have paid them, and that's why you're denied commercial hemp.
Mr. Young, following the rotation I described, you are next in this.
Indiana's a farm state, and we require a strong farm economy. And I've consistently voted for a farm bill that gives our farm communities, our farm operations, the sort of resources they need. That includes crop insurance so that the exigencies of the weather and so forth can be controlled. We need to make sure that we tackle big regulations coming out of the Environmental Protection Agency. We've seen an uptick of those in the Obama administration, and Hillary Clinton, she promises to double down. Evan Bayh voted with Hillary Clinton 85% of the time when the 2 of them were in the United States Senate. We can expect him to rubber stamp her policy agenda. She's now helping to fund his campaign. There are other things we can do to help our farmers. When it comes to reforming our tax code, we need to eliminate the death tax. Death should not be a taxable event. Evan Bayh has consistently voted against repealing the death tax. He's even voted against exemptions for our family farms here in the state of Indiana, thus adversely impacting multi-generational farms and preventing people from passing their farms on to the next generation. But perhaps the best thing we can do to make sure that farming interests are recognized and we advance the interests of farming communities is we can grow the economy faster. That gets back to regulatory reform. I've offered the signature regulatory reform effort of the entire Congress. It's called the REINS Act. It requires every major regulation, whether it's the Waters of the United States regulation coming out of our EPA or Obamacare regulations or IRS regulations, they'd have to come before Congress for an up or down vote. We, of course, need tax reform, and I've discussed that. But most importantly, I'll put a very fine point on this, we have to repeal the largest tax increase in American history, which is Obamacare. Evan Bayh gave us Obamacare. Hoosiers didn't ask for it. In fact, they pleaded with Evan Bayh not to vote for it. He listened to D.C. special interests, who he later worked for. He did not listen to Hoosiers. I'm a Hoosier Marine. I will always fight for your interest, for your rights, and for your values.
Candidates, there's probably a good reason I'm a former TV newscaster. The debate format, as I described it, was 2-1-1-1, and I missed the one on the back end of the first question. So, Mr. Bayh, I'm going to allow you to go back and talk about trade, again, wrapping up your comments, and then you can respond to the farm question. My apologies for losing sight of
That's
this.
okay, Ken. So I get 2 1 minutes here?
You do indeed.
Wow, lucky me. Well, you notice that Congressman Young never explained to TJ and those poor workers at Carrier why he's voted repeatedly for the tax deduction that is shipping their jobs to Mexico. For our viewers at home who don't know this, companies like Carrier actually get to deduct the cost of shipping our jobs abroad from their U.S. taxes. And Congressman Young thinks that's just fine. Well, it's not just fine. That's something I'm going to fight to change. He also mentioned trade agreements. Well, I voted against CAFTA. He was for the TPP until he had a deathbed conversion in the last couple of weeks. When the election, he saw which way the political winds were blowing. I'm going to get tough on trade by standing up against illegal subsidies that affect companies like Edsel, intellectual property theft. We've got to do more about that. And we've also got to make sure that we stop China and other countries from engaging in illegal currency manipulation. So one final thing, Ken, there are just so many charges flying around here tonight. You've given me 1 minute? I thought I only had 1 minute. Oh, well.
You had 1 and 1. And then Mrs. Brenton gets to wrap up her summary, and then we go back to you for 2-1-1-1.
So my 1 minute now is with regard to what Lucy was saying? Okay.
Don't ask me again, I may change.
Very good. You
All
got it.
right.
You got it.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, well, look, first I'd like to thank Lucy for raising the topic of what we can do to help rural Indiana. I think that's absolutely right. I'm for broadband expansion into our small towns and rural communities. I think that would be good. I'm for more research into better crops. I think that that would be good. I support Indiana ethanol. That's good for our corn growers, even though Congressman Young has voted against that. So I think we need, I'm actually going to shock all of you and say I agree with something that Congressman Young just said. We've had too many rules and regulations that are making it harder for Indiana's farmers. I think we need a timeout on all that sort of thing. So I don't support that. But, you know, Congressman Young just lobs all these false allegations around. It's just flat out not true that I am for the death tax. I vote against the death tax. As a matter of fact, I disagree with Hillary Clinton on that. I'm for repealing the death tax. Congressman Young has voted with the lobbyists for the big banks, the insurance companies, companies like Carrier. I have consistently voted for Hoosier interests, and I always will.
Mrs. Brenton, your 1 minute to summarize.
Thank you. We need to stop playing political football with our farmers' lives, whether it's through farm subsidies or deciding which crop is a winner and which crop is a loser, depending upon who it is that's contributing to your campaign. That's what we need to stop. And so what I would like to see is I would like to see across-the-board legalization of commercial hemp so that our farmers can be free to innovate a crop that fixes nitrogen, can end our dependence on foreign oil, and of course replace a lot of the cotton paper deforestation that we see. And second of all, if our taxes and regulations were not driving businesses out of this country, then we wouldn't be seeing them fleeing to Mexico. The reason that they do is because there's a lack of certainty in our tax code. You see, you have to contribute to political campaigns in order to get the loophole later that you can drive a truck through. Let's end that political campaign contribution as it's linked to what happens in Washington, D.C. A 0% income tax rate on our corporations would level that playing field, and countries around the world would find that they're losing business to us.
Mr. Young, your 2 minute topic.
Well, thank you so much. Obamacare has been an absolute job killer. It's been a disaster for this economy, and it's hurt so many Americans. You know, Premiums are going up so high, up to 41% here in the state of Indiana. Deductibles are so high, even if people have insurance through Obamacare, it's so frequent that they can't use insurance. 200,000 people have had their policies canceled. This is the largest tax increase in American history, and it's really a millstone around our economy. But you know, perhaps you need to spend a little more time in Indiana, as I have, to see the real impact of Obamacare. You know, I think of Tara up in Mishawaka. I think of Lori in Lebanon. Lori's she is a waitress. Her husband is a truck driver who has had some health problems. He can no longer drive his truck. Their Obamacare premium was $26 a month originally. They thought, hey, great deal. Then it was $343 a month the next year. Most recently, it's been $1,100 a month. They are taking the penalty. They no longer have insurance. There's a real human cost to Evan Bayh's deciding vote for Obamacare right here in Indiana. So we have to repeal it and replace it with a bipartisan law that works for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Bayh, you have a minute.
Well, there's a real human cost to what Congressman Young wants to do. He wants to take insurance away from 350,000 of our fellow Hoosiers. This is something that Governor Pence did that I agree with, that Congressman Young wants to undo. That would not only be bad for those people because they will no longer have health care, that's going to mean that their costs of being cared for will be shifted onto all the rest of us, forcing premiums up. There's also a real cost to what human cost to what Congressman Young wants to do, making it possible for insurance companies to charge women more for their health insurance than men, just because they happen to be female. There's also a real human cost to Congressman Young wanting to lift the cap that we put in place in insurance company profits so they can charge you whatever they want. Unlimited profits, unlimited premium increases. That's just not right. There's also a real human cost to our seniors at home. Congressman Young wants to reopen the donut hole, forcing Hoosier seniors, our parents and grandparents, to spend $1,400 a year more on prescription drugs. Those are real people who are being hurt in real ways by what will be hurt in real ways if Congressman Young is able to do what he wants to do in the United States Senate. Now, as I said before, what we need to do is fix the parts of the law that need to be fixed and keep those that are working well. We need to help small businesses by increasing the definition of a work week to 40 hours a week. We need to lift the cap on small businesses from 50 to 100 people. We need to help those who are in the individual marketplace have lower costs for their health insurance by having competition across state lines and having more transparency so that you can shop for your services and get the lowest cost option. Those are the kind of things that we need to do, not harm people, not harm seniors, not drive premiums up the way Congressman Young wants to do.
Mrs. Brenton, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. Mr. Young, Mr. Bayh, you've both spent time in Washington, D.C. So much time, in fact, that I'm afraid it's turned you to the dark side. In fact, what I mean by that is, why are we discussing programs that people are forced to buy? Let the free market work. We're arguing over Obamacare and how much people's premiums increased. Why aren't we discussing why the government is forcing through taxation people to buy a product they don't want or need? I'm a woman. I have birthed 10 beautiful children, 7 girls and 3 boys. You should charge me more because I'm more likely to use you and it might be more expensive. But if the free market were opened, if I could negotiate with a healthcare company to have the coverage that I want instead of that forced and shoved down my throat by the government, then instead of having a $15,200 cost for birth number 8 at the hospital, I could have had that $5,000 home birth cost paid for by my health insurance instead. In fact, the only thing that I can say to the American people and to Hoosiers, these are not the senators you're looking for.
Mr. Young, you get a chance to wrap up.
You know, clearly Evan Bayh has become a creature of Washington. He's left us. He really doesn't get it. This is not just about Obamacare. This is how Evan Bayh handled the situation. He voted against Hoosiers. Hoosiers pleaded with him to vote against this law. It was a partisan law. It didn't invite Republican input or Republican ideas. We've got a lot of good ideas, and the reason we've had a policy war in this country is because there's no consensus on the front end. But that's not it. He then left us with higher health care costs. What did you do, Evan? What did you do, Evan, after that? You took the money and ran. Evan Bayh took the money and ran. He joined a major lobbying firm in Washington, D.C., and he represented clients that needed relief from the very problem he created, from Obamacare. Meanwhile, our premiums skyrocketed. He left us while our doctors were lost. We lost our doctors and specialists. You know, Evan, when we needed a senator most, you left us to work for them. in Washington, D.C. You made millions of dollars, and now we can hold you accountable in this election. And we need to hold Evan Bayh accountable.
We are now at our final question of the night.
Ken,
I wish I could
just-
give you a rebuttal. Evan, we're really literally out of time.
Well,
so
he's just flat out wrong in
well,
what he just said, and he's voted with the lobbyists and the
Get
special
online
interests
tonight and read about
down
the
the line
candidates.
with the
Consistent
banks,
with
with
we
the
have
insurance
30
companies.
seconds for each of you to answer
Well, I
this
have an
basic
opportunity.
question.
Okay.
And you start, Mr. Young. Why would voters conclude you would be the best candidate to represent them in Washington? First, Mr. Young.
After 8 years of the failed Obama-Clinton policies, which, make no mistake, will resemble the Clinton-Bayh policies, Americans are left with debt, doubt, despair, and a broken healthcare system. We need more common-sense Hoosier conservatism in Washington, D.C. We need more Indiana and Washington, less Washington and Indiana. I know everyone's tired of career politicians. You may just want a clean house. Some of you may think, I just want to send in the Marines. Well, you can send in one. Let's together put people before politics. I humbly ask for your vote.
Mrs. Brenton, your 30 seconds.
Thank you. You know, I feel like I need to step away from them a little bit. They're slinging so much mud and I'm wearing a white suit. But let me tell you this. Both of these gentlemen have voted for things where they say businesses are too big to fail and the taxpayers had to bail them out. You know what I say? I say we're too small to drown. Stop bailing out businesses, stop bailing out your cronies, and bail us out instead. Let us keep our taxpayer money in our pocket. You can send in a mom.
Mr. Bayh, finally.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. And I'm running for the United States Senate to try and help Hoosiers and Hoosier families solve the challenges that they face. I'm running to help create good jobs with higher wages for our small businesses. I want fair trade deals that won't send jobs from Carrier to Mexico and that sort of thing. I'm running to make college more affordable, building on the 21st Century Scholars Program that's helped us send 70,000 of our young people to college, even though Congressman Young has voted to cut their Pell Grants and to raise their interest rates. I'm voting to work with Democrats and Republicans and even Libertarians to do what's right to help you, because that's what this election should be all about.
Candidates, thank you all for being here tonight. We apologize. We have a hard out for the stations around the state, so we're going to say good night.